Ho, ho, ho! Merry Christmas!
Well, hello and welcome to today's episode of Need I Say Myrrh, the Christmas podcast. And today is a very special episode where we'll be sharing some of the correspondence that we've received here at Need I Say Myrrh, the Christmas podcast. As we've said on every episode of Need I Say Myrrh, the Christmas podcast, we do welcome correspondence, and I'm thankful to everyone who has submitted correspondence to Need I Say Myrrh, the Christmas podcast. And as part of today's correspondence episode, we'll be sharing some of that correspondence, as well as giving you some updates on previous episodes of Need I Say Myrrh, the Christmas podcast, and answering some of your questions, some of your listener questions from listeners of Need I Say Myrrh, the Christmas podcast. Two people to thank before we get into the episode. The correspondence that you hear on this episode is read by episode 1 guest Dan James.
Ho, ho, ho! Merry Christmas!
And by the very lovely Hannah Thomas.
Ho, ho, ho! Merry Christmas!
So let's start with some of the correspondence that we've received, including some of the big debates that have come out of this season of Need I Say Myrrh, the Christmas podcast. And the very first email that we received to our Gmail account was from Richard in Reading, who said this.
You asked us to email this address, so I have. Every blessing, Richard.
This was soon followed by an email from Steve in Dunstable, who sent a lovely message, including these words.
I would gladly listen to longer episodes.
Well, the good news, Steve, is that you can get longer episodes just by slowing them down, like this. Another early email came from Pete in Surrey, who talked about how the podcast had inspired him to do things a bit differently at Christmas.
Thanks for your glorious podcast, which has brought me a lot of joy. It has particularly inspired me to get some tinsel for our Christmas tree next year. Thank you.
Which, to be honest, was the opposite of the effect I was hoping to achieve with this podcast. And the topic of tinsel has stimulated a lot of correspondence with people with strong views on both sides of the debate. Probably the strongest correspondence of all came from someone using a pseudonym, writing under the name Noel Laguialond in South Wales, who said this.
I would like to lodge a complaint, and I hope that this podcast will be banned in the future. I have deliberately not set up an account with X for fear of discovering more of your rhetoric and even worse followers of the same mind. I am, of course, referring to tinsel. I can almost hear you and your misguided guests referring to this ultimate festive decor as outdated and tacky and decrying the problems of keeping the little sparkly wafts from cluttering up your homey homes. Let this be a lesson to you. There is much to be celebrated in the appreciation of this bold and whimsical, ultimately Christmassy adornment.
Other correspondence on tinsel included these words from Peter, also in South Wales.
I'm deeply concerned by the widespread English tinsel phobia which has been heartbreakingly apparent during the series. I'm now worried that my plan to decorate our pastor's pulpit with garlands of red and gold tinsel for Christmas Day may not be appreciated. Could you advise?
Yeah, my advice is don't do it. Peter continues.
On a more cheerful note, I was happy to hear the advice to use lametta to disable hoovers. This is life-changing, as every year or so my wife insists on getting out the hoover, upsetting me and the dog. Could you advise where we could buy some?
I think you can buy it from the range, the shop recommended by Duncan Hollins in his episode of this podcast. Other tinsel defenders included Nathaniel from London.
I do not understand and firmly disagree with the hate of tinsel being espoused on this podcast.
Inaka from Surrey.
I really don't get the hate. All these people saying it falls apart. What rubbish are they buying? Mine's lasted for years.
And Matthew from Aberdeen.
Tinsel seems to have had an all-round bad press. Personally, I don't mind it. I will say, though, that I do not miss the passing of paper chains that we used to have to assemble and hang from corner to corner in classrooms, front rooms and church halls when I was little.
Fiona from Bridgend offered a more balanced assessment, seeing both the positives and negatives of tinsel.
Tinsel is horrific and inevitably molts everywhere, so you're finding it around the house until Easter. But it does give volume to sparse branches and seems to bring small people joy, so I'll allow it.
While Duncan from Plymouth offered just a one-word review of tinsel.
Degenerate.
While we're talking about Christmas decorations, I do have an important clarification to share from Mrs. Broadway, the wife of episode 11 guest Mark, who says this.
People keep offering to take my bauble. Just to be clear, I love it and do not wish to part with it.
While we're on the topic of Mark Broadway, he stirred up another of the great controversies of this podcast when he said these words in his episode.
At Christmas time, I'm permitted to keep blue cheese in the house for the purpose of taking a mince pie, popping the pastry lid off and replacing the pastry lid with blue cheese. And that really is the zenith of sort of human creativity, human culinary creativity.
Here's what our friend Noël Laguiolande thought of that suggestion.
I sincerely hope there are no foodie spin-offs or cutesy recipe books resulting from this podcast. I, for one, will not be putting blue cheese in my M&S mince pies this Christmas season.
And Charlie on Twitter had this to say to Mark.
You should be cancelled for this.
Other listeners were more persuaded by Mark's presentation, including Peter from South Wales.
Although at first my stomach turned at the thought, having watched Mark's vlog, I shall definitely be trying blue cheese with mince pies.
And Duncan from Plymouth.
I am very tempted to try blue cheese in a mince pie.
And Stephen on Twitter gave this suggestion.
Put the top back on and warm through in the oven just to get the cheese a little softer, but to release some more flavour from the mincemeat. Pour a small glass of sherry, and Robert is your mother's brother.
And Mark also inspired 8-year-old listener Ruben to try something new this Christmas as well.
Hello, you remember that blue cheese mince pie? Well, I made this what's-it mince pie. Yum, 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 yum.
Yes, you did hear correctly. What's-it mince pie? Take a mince pie, pop off the lid, replace it with what's-it, and enjoy. We did get quite a lot of other food-related correspondence, including these comments on sprouts from Ruth in Cumbria.
The love of Brussels sprouts is disturbing.
Although if you do like Brussels sprouts, here's a top tip from Tim in Bedfordshire.
Sprouts and bacon are improved even further with the addition of cashew nuts.
In other food-related correspondence, Paul from South Wales noted this omission in the discussion of food items.
No one has yet mentioned chocolate Yule log.
And Paul also shared this food-related lament.
Asda should bring back the chocolate house they did in 2019 because I wasn't able to find one and I still want to try it.
Now at this point I should probably offer something approaching an apology, although I should clarify it's not an apology. But in my discussion with Ewan, I was quite critical of his comments on duck. But I have to now say that we are having duck this Christmas in the Thomas household. We have ordered a duck that we'll be having for Christmas Day. And another listener was also quite positive about Ewan's promotion of duck. Here's Fiona.
I agree with Ewan. 1 or 2 quality meals is better than a turkey.
Although Fiona clarified that she doesn't agree with Ewan on everything.
However, absolutely refusing Christmas movie recommendations from him.
Now, one of the other memorable food-related moments of the series was when Jim Sayers gave us 2 very detailed recipes for Christmas canapés. Canaries? But here are some other suggestions from listeners about Christmas canapés that you could enjoy this year. So, for example, here's a suggestion from Duncan in Plymouth.
You can't beat pigs in blankets and champagne.
Ruth from Cumbria says,
Marzipan potatoes. They are a real thing. They're basically mini potato-shaped pieces of marzipan dusted in cocoa powder.
Fiona from Bridgend.
Baked new or baby potatoes with sour cream and chives sprinkled on top.
And Caroline from Bridgend sent in 4 Christmas canapé suggestions.
Turmeric pickled onions and red wine pickled onions and normal pickled onions and chili pickled onions.
And here's one final piece of food-related correspondence from podcast guest Martin.
As you will no doubtedly remember, my favourite part of the festivities from an edible perspective is the Boxing Day leftover Christmas Day meal sandwich. Following Steve Neal's episode, I feel the need to experiment, and will this year be attempting the leftover Christmas Day meal pizza. Thank you for this public broadcasting extravaganza and your commitment to challenging our Christmas festive traditions.
We didn't have much correspondence about people's favourite non-religious Christmas songs, although we did have one person responding to comments that Jim Sayers made on his episode where he said this.
And Dolly Parton's got some fairly awful ones as well.
Caroline from Bridgend has some words for Jim there.
Jim, Dolly Parton's Christmas music is everything you should want in Christmas music. Cheerful and cheesy, easy to remember, overly joyful.
We also had some music-related correspondence from our old friend Noelle, who offered her views on that musical classic Christmas film, The Muppet Christmas Carol.
I hate it.
And Peter from South Wales poses this music-related question.
Do others agree that Away in a Manger is everyone's least favourite Christmas song of all time, religious or non-religious?
No, we can't agree that. When it comes to the question of people's favourite characters in the nativity account, not including Jesus, we only really had one piece of correspondence, and that was from Pete in Surrey, who wrote to say this.
I'm still desperately hoping for someone's favourite nativity character to be Zechariah. He has an amazing character arc and development. I'm disappointed every time I hear yet another guest say Mary or Joseph. Please rectify this for season 2.
I later had a follow-up email from Pete saying this.
Thank you for directing me towards Jim's episode. I had previously listened to it, but forgot about his reference to Zechariah amidst all the talk of carols and recipe ideas.
Now, Pete's first email mentions the fact that most people on the podcast named Mary or Joseph as their favourite person in the nativity account, not including Jesus. And I have been asked what the actual statistics were across all the episodes. In fact, Inika from Surrey sent in this message.
We're over halfway through at the point I'm sending this, and I'm fully regretting not spreadsheeting the results, or at least tallying. Please tell me someone is, or else I'll have to go back and re-listen to them all to get the stats.
Sadly, I don't have any stats for anything apart from favourite nativity characters, but here is the official countdown. A new entry at number 4, it's Zechariah, as named by one person. And joint 4, up 3 places, it's the Animals, as also named by one person. And also at number 4 is a non-mover, the Angels, with 1 vote. At number 3, as chosen by 3 people, is the Shepherds. At number 2, with 6 votes, it is the one, the only Mary. And at number 1, with 11 votes, it is Joseph. There we go. A few more general comments we've had on the podcast. Laura says this.
I've loved hearing from so many different people about their Christmas experiences and some of their stories. Yellow heart emoji. One comment though. Myrrh is far too hard to spell.
I think the problem, Laura, is not that myrrh is hard to spell, but we don't spell things consistently. Really, for example, December should be spelled Decembyrrh. When a cat purrs, it should be Pyrrh. Someone called Deborah should be Deborryrr. What? Yeah. Anyway, here's Matthew from Aberdeen.
I'm very interested in the different ways that people mark religious festivals. I think it's always important to know not everyone does it like me.
And as we remember that not everyone does Christmas like us, here are some updates on some of our guests from this season. We're pleased to announce that the latest book by L.R. Hay is out now. It's the 3rd instalment of her Young Testament series. It's called That Woman's Girl, and it's available to buy on Amazon. We're also pleased to announce that Sophie Kinningley has managed to survive Whamageddon so far and has avoided hearing Last Christmas by Wham this Advent. We're also pleased to announce that Richard Miles has managed to avoid putting up his cardboard star light-fitting lot of hassle Christmas decoration this year, although there are no promises for next year. And Davey Ellison got in touch to let us know that he did end up preaching at a carol service. He preached at their student-organised carol service. And also he says that at the time of recording he had in fact bought his 2023 Christmas decoration but had forgotten about it because he bought it back in August. It's a tea light holder all the way from Peru. And if you want to see a picture, then please get in touch. We welcome correspondence on this podcast. And now we come finally to some of the questions that listeners have submitted for the host to answer, the host being me. And we'll start with some questions from Nathaniel in London, who asked me, what's your favourite Christmas food? What's your least favourite Christmas decoration? What's your favourite Christmas song? Brackets not including carols. And who's your favourite person in the Nativity, brackets not including Jesus? Well, Nathaniel, the answers to those questions will be unveiled in a very, very special Christmas Eve episode, which will be released on Christmas Eve. We hope you enjoy it. But Nathaniel also asked me, who's my favourite guest? That's an easy question to answer. My favourite guest to have was definitely... And he's also asked, will I do it again? Because it's been really enjoyable to listen to. I'm glad you've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed making it too. We'll have to see what the future holds. I'd like to do something, maybe not a daily podcast. I don't know that I could do a daily podcast through the whole of next year, but maybe something else will come up. On a related note, Ruth from Cumbria has asked me,
how are you intending to follow this podcast up? Easter has fewer associated traditions.
Well, we do welcome correspondence on this podcast, so if any of you have any ideas about an Easter podcast, or indeed any other podcast, please get in touch. There's obviously some scope for an Easter podcast. What's your favourite brand of chocolate Easter egg? What's your favourite thing to do with the extra bank holidays? What's your favourite saying of Jesus from the cross? So we could see what happens. Here's a question that came in from someone called Richard.
I'm wondering what your thoughts on pickled onions are. They might have come up, but I've only listened to a couple of the episodes.
Now, normally I would refuse to answer a question from such a half-hearted listener, but we had a similar question coming from Caroline in Bridgend.
What are your opinions on pickled onions and Dolly Parton?
Well, I am a big fan of pickled onions. They are, I think, an essential part of Christmas Day tea and Boxing Day lunch, and good to enjoy throughout the rest of the year. They do go well with a pork pie or other things like that. I normally enjoy pickled onions without Dolly Parton. I say my views on Dolly Parton is I like her music more than Jim Sayers does, but less than Caroline Taylor does. So I'm somewhere on that spectrum. Here's another question that came in from someone else in Bridgend called Fiona.
My American friend said mince pies, Christmas pudding and Christmas cake are all essentially the same thing. What say you? What alternative British Christmas treats do you present to mitigate this?
Well, firstly, I think your American friend is severely misguided. That's a bit like saying that bourbons, chocolate digestives and Jaffa cakes are all essentially the same thing. So if your American friend was visiting me over Christmas, they would get served those things and they would be happy about it. If you want to add a bit of extra variety, what you can do is with a mince pie, you can pop the lid off and put on some blue cheese or maybe some Wotsits, something like that. Maybe you can suggest that to your American friend. Here's a question that came in from Duncan in Plymouth.
What do you get the man who has everything?
Probably a Lynx Africa gift set. Two final questions that have come in. Matthew from Aberdeen has said, have you enjoyed recording this series? And the answer is definitely yes. Thanks so much to all of the guests. I've loved all of our chats, especially the one with... But all of them have been great, and it's been fun to record it. It's been fun to get some of your feedback and some of your comments as well. And so thank you for making this a fun experience for me in the run-up to Christmas. I've also had a question from... Well, not so much a question. It's more of a statement, a command, instruction. So Paul from South Wales says, we'd all enjoy an anecdote from the Christmases of your youth. So to close with, let me tell you about one Christmas that we had when I was younger. Woke up on Christmas Day and I was sick. Turns out I had the flu. So I hope you have a very happy Christmas, and please join us tomorrow for a special Christmas Eve episode to find out my answers to this podcast's questions.
Ho, ho, ho! Merry Christmas!